Hello, everybody else. I've already said hello to everybody in the store, and now I know that there are some of you out there. This is Otto Penzler. You are at the Mysterious Bookshop, where tonight we are ecstatic to welcome Lyndsay Faye. I have now been friends with Lyndsay since before her first book, or at the time of her first book.
I think before.
Before, yeah, and I published Lyndsay her Sherlock Holmes collection called The Art of the Mystery, and we are doing another book with Lyndsay, another Sherlock Holmes book in December called Observations by Gaslight, which won't be available till December. But we're here tonight to celebrate her Hamlet book.
Yes.
Now, Hamlet is the starting point of this book. It is not an exact reproduction of Hamlet in any way. As an aside, I have to say, although I've been a great fan of all of Lyndsay's books, and one of the few authors where I actually read every book. There's so many books and so little time that I don't always have time to read everything. Everybody thinks I do, but I don't. But I do with Lyndsay. And I think I wrote about this and was interviewed about it on more than one occasion. My favorite book of the year was Jane Steele. I just love that book. If you haven't read it, get a copy. Really, it's just so wonderful. But tonight, we're talking about
something completely different.
Tonight to get back to the King of Infinite Space. What a hard title to remember. It is for me, anyway. But anyway, Jane Steele, I can remember, because it's 2 words. And then it gets harder. This is a different take on it. It's now set in New York. It's set in contemporary times. It is even more violent than the original Hamlet, which is not exactly a walk in the park. It's a fascinating how anybody can take Hamlet and use it as the basis for a book as different and as bizarre as this one is. And that's not a pejorative term, or it isn't meant as one, but to me it's a miraculous achievement, and I congratulate you for it, and thank you for joining us tonight. And now this is Lyndsay Faye, who's going to say a couple of words or more about her book, and maybe even do a brief reading.
I will.
Great. Lyndsay Faye.
I missed you.
I missed you too.
So I'm in the best bookstore in New York. So I got that going for me, which is nice. I don't know. I was having a gigantic lack of confidence. I have been having it all week, but today and yesterday were particularly bad regarding the King of Infinite Space. And so I'm gonna start by reading some of the things people have said about it, and I'm sorry, but that's just what I'm gonna do, and then I'm gonna feel better, and then I'm gonna read you some stuff, and it's gonna feel much better. Shakespeare devotees will be impressed at the variations Faye introduces to the play's plotline, and Faye's considerable descriptive gifts are on ample display. Publishers Weekly starred review. That was very kind of them. Faye's latest is not only a richly realized mashup of mystery and fantasy, it's also a clever pastiche of Hamlet. Ben and Horatio's involving relationship is brilliantly realized, as, for that matter, is the entire book, which is, alas, ever faithful to the original, which is, remember, a tragedy. Booklist starred review. Lush and magical, thoughtful and provocative, The King of Infinite Space is a remarkable achievement, staying true to Shakespeare's tragic play in ways that will surprise and delight while reveling in neurodivergence, queer attraction, and quantum physics. Book page, starred review. So, I don't believe any of that. I'm pretty sure they were all high. But whatever they were on, I would like to know where they got it from, because it sounds like everything is just suddenly a delight. I've been really grateful at the reception that the book has received so far. It is a weird book. I wanted to talk for a minute about just how I came to love Shakespeare, because I don't know that origin stories are necessarily particularly important to everybody, but like I always like to know how something started. So when I was a kid and I had finished with all of my sort of more kid books, the Nancy Drew ones. Even when I was still reading Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and I was like 10 or 11, I started reading Shakespeare, and my parents took me and my brother. We lived in this weird little cow town, mill town, technically, I suppose, called Longview, Washington, and it was only about like I'm gonna say like a 6-hour drive if you were doing it reasonably to get to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and every summer we would go to both of the plays at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. There weren't a great deal of Shakespeare plays put on in Longview. I don't recall there being many, but we would just drive and get down to Medford and get down to sort of like around Ashland. And the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is actually pretty prestigious. Like it has very good production values. And so I was lucky enough to get to see a lot of fantastic Shakespeare plays when I was very, very, very young. And that's just a lucky thing, you know? That's just something that I serendipitously walked into. And I continued to be lucky enough to see many, many, many really good Shakespeare productions. And I completely fell in love with the language and with the passion and with the plots and with the realness of the characters and with how invested they were in absolutely everything. Because it's really, you'd be hard put to find a Shakespeare character unless the Shakespeare character has like 2 lines, right? It would be difficult to find a Shakespeare character who is not deeply emotionally invested in what is going on. And so to me it was beautiful because I was doing theater, and I was an English major, and all of these things. So I just found it really pretty. And my parents were smart enough to drive us down to Ashland for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival every summer, and it was absolutely lovely. So summerly, this was the other thing. This was the other thing that really solidified all of the Shakespeare obsession. So there was the Oregon Shakespeare Festival when I was a child, and then I moved here, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I see you in your red mask. Okay, so there's one of them. So when I moved here, I realized that you could go see Shakespeare every summer for free if you got there early enough, right? And I have gotten there real early. I promise you, like early with jazz hands. So that was another aspect of it where it only solidified the Shakespeare obsession, where I was just sort of like, I can see 2 fantastically portrayed Shakespeare plays for free every summer. Are you kidding? And I just started using my yelling voice like that, and then I didn't miss a play for like I think it was like 6 years until either they stopped doing it or I got really sick. But yeah, like it was about 6 years going that I had seen like 12 Shakespeare in the Park productions, and it was just beautiful. And I think that Shakespeare is always beautiful. and it's really hard for me to alter that opinion in any way. I mean, you can talk at me about Shakespeare not being beautiful, but I'm going to talk back at you, and there's going to be a debate on the subject. By the way, I should say something officially, which is that whenever I start these talks, I'm always a little bit nervous about them. So, one of the things I do to mitigate that is to say that from the very beginning that it is a Q&A, and at any moment somebody wants to ask a question, then ask the question, and or make the comment, or just be like, I think you're full of shit. like any of those things are completely fine. So that's one of the things that I try to make clear at the beginning, because just sitting here and doing a speech about my imaginary friends is kind of weird, right? So yeah, I went to great lengths actually to get sometimes to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and or Shakespeare in the Park. There was one kind of memorable occasion where I had tickets to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and I drove. People in the car were concerned briefly, but I'm a very good driver. Or back when I was driving. So I drove at approximately 85 to 90 miles an hour for the entire freeway ride to get to the like opening curtain of the Shakespeare play. And yeah, I have gone to some length. So I wanted to read a very brief, sort of like a critical bit about Hamlet specifically, because this, of course, is as you can tell, based on Hamlet. So I wanted to read a little bit of it, which very much informed what I was doing and what I always do in my books. And well, we can talk about it whenever you like. This is from Hamlet, An Ideal Prince, and Other Essays in Shakespearean Interpretation, by Alexander W. Crawford. This is from 1916. If Hamlet does not go really mad under his unparalleled griefs and burdens it is because under all circumstances his grim and tragic humor holds evenly the balance of his mind. In some of the most tragic moments of his career, he has the sanity to play with his tormentors and with the sad conditions of his life. As Sir Herbert Tree has recently said, but for humor, he should go mad. Sanity is humor. I could go on. There's more of the quote that I have here. But that rings very true to me, just as a general principle. I often say I think that we laugh because it hurts so much, and I find that critical analysis of Hamlet to be very accurate, because Hamlet is forever just like cracking witticisms at people, and Hamlet is just in terrible pain for the entire play, and it also is interesting because an incredible number of commentators find Hamlet like a particularly spineless character, or a character who doesn't particularly, like hew to his own standards, or a character who isn't strong enough to accomplish his goals, etc., etc. But I've always thought that Hamlet has just suffered a lot of loss, and is dealing as best he can, and a lot of it, with the falsified madness, if you believe it's falsified. Some people believe that it's accurate, which is of course completely fine. Any interpretation is fine, but Hamlet, in particular, with all of the things that he's actually experienced, I don't know that I would have dealt with it as well as Hamlet, to be honest with you. Like, I might have screwed up worse. So I did want to mention that. The quote saying sanity is humor is important to me. And the same critic, actually, he asserts that, quote, if the quality of humor is important in comedy, it is, I venture to say, yet more important in tragedy, whether it be in the tragedy of life or in the tragedy of the theater. In Hamlet, for instance, the firmament of tragedy is made blacker by the jewels of humor with which it is bestarred. The first words Hamlet sighs forth are in the nature of a pun, a little more than kin and less than kind. And it's true. Because if you don't leaven something tragic with something comic, then you're never going to notice that something is tragic because it's just sort of flatline the entire time. Or if you were to take something comic and never leaven it with something tragic, it would also be a flatline the entire time. And so it's actually extremely important to take whatever material you're working with and whatever things you grab from the tragedy aisle or the comedy aisle, you know, in the Guy Fieri games of writing stories, like you're going to have to somehow intermingle them so that there's enough of a contrast that you can actually see what you're looking at. It's almost impossible for people to see what they're looking at if there's no contrast going on. It's why if you're lost in the desert and you're staring out into the desert, then you have absolutely no idea what direction to go in because it's just all sand and sky and that's it. So there has to be some sort of disparity. And I always appreciated that about Hamlet particularly. So I also like this comment. In nearly all his references to the condition of affairs in Denmark, Hamlet indulges in a grim satirical humor. His first meeting with Horatio furnishes opportunity. Directly after the warm greetings between the friends, the following conversation takes place. Hamlet. But what is your affair in Elsinore? Horatio. My lord, I came to see your father's funeral. I pray thee, do not mock me, fellow student. I think it was to see my mother's wedding. Indeed, my lord, it followed hard upon. Thrift, Horatio. The funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage table. And people insist that this is just a relentless tragedy, you know? And what I tried to do in The King of Infinite Space when I modernized it was to turn a lot of the jokes into I'm not going to say more obvious jokes, but more modern jokes that were just sort of, you know, there. And it's like, well, this can be nothing but a joke. Like there's no alternative to that. And I do think that since I'm absolutely in no way ever shape or form Shakespeare, then I can get away with it as being like jokes, like as opposed to people thinking that Shakespeare is about gravitas and importance and all of those things. So one of the other major things that is different in The King of Infinite Space would be the relationship between Benjamin and Horatio. So I can read you a small passage from it, but the Hamlet character, he clearly loves Ophelia, and he clearly also is extremely upset at any notion of Horatio being upset. And I always found that really interesting because it is completely possible to, you know, care about more than one person. So this is a bit from The King of Infinite Space as well. So Benjamin is speaking at the moment. This is actually more towards like 3/4 toward the end of the book. But it is directly lifted from Hamlet. And I think that if you're familiar with Hamlet, you'll probably recognize it. And if you're not familiar with Hamlet, then I can help you recognize it. so either way, Benjamin says, most people's feelings override their logic and thus their decision making. Christ knows mine do, right? But you're different. It would never occur to you to manipulate others, broadcast your emotions to get something you wanted or to change theirs. And your feelings don't affect the things you know to be true or change what you believe is right. Those stay constant. Do you have any idea how insane that is? Blood migrates to Horatio's cheeks. Good Lord, I'm in no way out of the ordinary. That's a load of garbage, Benjamin growls. There's no one else like you. Nothing emerges when Horatio's lips part. He's got it backwards. There isn't anyone like Benjamin. Benjamin is the Hamlet character. He should be saying that about himself. Surely Horatio is a dime a dozen. Just an average scholar with an even temper, a solid brain, a love for good storytelling, and too much educational debt. Are you still listening? Yes, Horatio manages. Are you sure you are? I think so. His friend leans forward until their brows are touching. While you were gone, Benjamin takes a steadying breath. I wore you in my heart every day. Benjamin, Horatio says, shocked. No, I did. I do. More things in earth and space exist than you ever dreamed you know. Do they? Yeah. I wore you then. I wear you now. I wear you in my heart of hearts. Benjamin's voice catches. Do you understand? So I also took that relationship and just sort of heightened it a couple touches, but heightened it more explicitly, and like it's not any more heightened than it actually was in the original play. To be honest with you, in the original play, Hamlet's dying and Horatio's like, "Give me the poison! I'm gonna die with you." And it's sort of like, okay, well, you're taking things a little far. but so I don't think I can go much further than the original play did. However, it was slightly more explicit, and I think just slightly more, I'm not going to be thrown in some sort of prison, So, yeah, it's essentially, it's a magic realism version of Hamlet. I haven't really touched on the Ophelia character, but her name is Leah. And Leah is Benjamin's estranged fiance, and she falls in with a trio of sisters who she describes as very weird sisters. Shakespeare geeks, you showed up. A lot of Leah's commentary, and she continues, to have a relationship with Benjamin, and the sisters that she lives with, they're from New Orleans, sort of like Creole voodoo queens. I mean, I don't know how to describe it, but they are powerful people, and Leah is doing a lot of things that are not necessarily in the foreground, but they are. So every third chapter, it switches narrators. Benjamin is Hamlet, so every third chapter is Benjamin, Horatio, then Leah, and they just go like that. So Leah's chapters, they are mostly to do with her having had a horrible breakup and then moved into figuring out how to work spells on people. So there's that. I think I've yammered on about this for plenty long enough. Would anybody like to ask anything about it, or yeah?
So obviously there's going to be a lot of Hamlet content, and then you mentioned the Weird Sisters. Mm-hmm. Should we be expecting references to other Shakespeare plays, or is that
Yes, absolutely. The main antagonist, his name is Robin Goodfellow.
oh,
So yeah.
oh, that's delightful.
So absolutely.
Lyndsay,
Yeah.
what's your work habit when you're working on a book like
Oh, total chaos, to be honest with you. So you know, I try to live my life. I try to do it. Here's the thing: when you're a freelancer, you try to work as often as you can, because whenever you're not working, you feel like you're slacking, which sucks. But whenever you're not working as a freelancer, then you're just sort of like, I should be at work, you know. And so I'm highly motivated to get back to the work. But as to pattern, there is none. I hate to break it to you. There's absolutely no pattern. Nothing whatsoever.
Well, a follow-up. How long did it take you to write?
Can you give me this phrase? To write it? A year. Yeah, about a year. They mostly take me about a year. I can't think of any that have largely deviated from that.
Oh,
Like a lot of them are historical, so it takes me a while to research and then to write it. But for the most part, to finish a book, to sort of like get to the end of it and say, I'm going to send this manuscript to my editor and see what my editor thinks of it, and then it's a whole other process. Yeah, it tends to be about a year.
So going off of that, give some thoughts. What spurred the flower talk that is evident in the book and your immersion into flowers?
Okay, so thank you, Jeff. So the Ophelia character, she is working with the Weird Sisters essentially, and they create bouquets and arrangements that are in the language of flowers essentially, but they're magical and they actually make a difference. So if you want somebody genuinely to forgive you or fall in love or go away, all of the above, any of the above, I mean, then you can pay a certain amount and ask the Weird Sisters to do it. So Ophelia, I will say this. Part of what inspired that is that I didn't think Ophelia in the original play had a whole lot of agency going on, and I wanted to stick her with some women who were older than her and who knew some stuff, and wanted to teach it to her, and she turns into somebody very, very powerful. And that's not a spoiler. It's just that's what I wanted to do with that particular character. And I wanted to turn Ophelia into somebody whose thing with flowers, and there's that whole final monologue of hers, you know, like where she's talking about her dad and violets and you know, she's drowns and all of these things. It really didn't seem like Ophelia had a great deal of agency in the original play, and I didn't feel like that was going to be my book. And so what I really wanted to do was to take something that would help Ophelia, even if she was in a lot of pain, be really powerful and have a ton of agency. And essentially, all the tragedy that visits Ophelia, you know, I tried to keep as true to the original as I could. But the language of flowers part was this way that she could enact certain things on people without her really being there, without her really having to confront them, that sort of thing. So, you know, I don't want to give any spoilers for any of this, but the language of flowers thing was largely about how she goes completely, bless you, how she goes completely mad at the end of her life in the original play, and in my version might not be all compos mentis, but is still, deeply affecting the world around her. So I think that's what it was. It's the best thing I can come up with. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned historical research for your other novels, and so this novel, there was, in addition to research into Hamlet, the play itself, what other sources of research that you engage in order to flesh out the book?
Good question. Thank you. So I reread Hamlet multiple times, obviously, as you already addressed. I didn't know anything really about I knew about the Victorian language of flowers, but in this one, it's the voodoo language of flowers. So it's not the same. So I had to do a lot of research into voodoo spellcasting. So I have like a lot of books lying around in my office that are about voodoo spellcasting, which you're giggling at, but it's true. I also, so let's see, for the Hamlet character, I audited classes at Columbia University. So for the Hamlet character, Benjamin, he's kind of like he's like a philosophical physicist. So like he's sort of half physicist, half spiritualist, half I don't even know. That's a lot of halves. But anyway, he essentially there is actually a graduate program at Columbia, the Philosophical Foundation of Physics or something along those lines. And that is exactly what I wanted the Benjamin character to be. Exactly what I wanted it to be. Because if Hamlet is anything, he is somebody who wants to understand the world at the same time he wants to philosophize about it. And so I went to Columbia for a while, and I asked them whether I could audit philosophical foundations of physics, and they said, sure, anybody can audit anything. So that's what I did.
Wow.
And it was a great experience, but at the same time it was at the beginning, quite hard to follow if you don't have the backup, foundation in the undergrad stuff. But yeah, for the Benjamin / Hamlet character, a lot of Columbia classes went into my describing his philosophical views with jazz hands.
You've obviously been very passionate